Major update now for millions of Americans who have college debt.
The United States student debt crisis is up to $1.7 trillion.
The higher costs of higher education is creating a stranglehold on mobility for some, and many say it's only getting worse.
But how did we get here? Why are over 40 million people $1.5 trillion in debt to the federal government? It all started over 60 years ago when the first federal student loans were offered under the National Defense Education Act of 1958. At the time, all student loans were direct loans funded by the U.S. Treasury. Seven years later, in 1965, Congress decided to expand on their initial approach and passed the Higher Education Act, which allowed banks and nonprofit lenders to provide guaranteed and government-subsidized loans. The Higher Education Act also gave birth to the staple government lending program until 2010, the FFEL, or the Federal Family Education Loan Program. A year later, Congress created the National Association of Financial Aid Administrators to monitor the status of financial aid across the country. In 1972, Congress created the Basic Educational Opportunity Grant, also known as the Pell Grant after Senator Claiborne Pell. At this point in time, a Pell Grant covered around 80% of the recipient's tuition. Today, a Pell Grant covers only 30%. The modern federal student loan system begins to take shape with the passing of the Higher Education Amendments, the creation of the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, or FAFSA, and the introduction of unsubsidized Stafford loans. A year later, the government passed the Student Loan Reform Act, officially implementing federal direct lending and cutting out the private institution middleman required under the FFEL program of 1965. The Bush administration passes the Higher Education Reconciliation Act, and student loan fees drop from 4% to 1%. The collective student debt, however, nears $400 billion. The Obama administration introduces legislation to completely do away with the FFEL program and funnel all new loans through the direct lending program. Private lenders now begin to offer private student loans independent from the federal government. The collective debt rapidly approaches $1 trillion. Financial stress caused by the global coronavirus pandemic forces the Trump administration to place all student loans in pandemic forbearance, a unique situation where borrowers do not have to pay on their loans and interest does not accrue. It is now August of 2022, and nearly 37 million Americans have not paid on their student loans in over 2 years. All student loans remain in pandemic forbearance, yet the relief program is set to end on August 31st. President Joe Biden, who campaigned on the promise of canceling $10,000 in student debt per borrower, has stated that he will publicly announce his plan by the end of the month. The collective student debt is currently at $1.75 trillion, and with record high inflation and soaring costs of post-secondary education, that situation is dire for many Americans. How the federal government chooses to respond remains to be seen.